Competency 5, this is all about appropriate language. As public speakers, we have a commitment and an obligation to be ethical with our public speaking skills because we have the power to change ideas, change people, and so we want to be ethical with how we're using our language. So the first thing is to think about bias-sensitive language and using inclusive language. This is American Psychological Association's APA style manuals, standards for being inclusive with language regarding sensitive to age, gender, race, nationality, etc. The idea is that the words that we choose can shape our perceptions and shape people's perceptions and change meanings. Words are just arbitrary symbols. Meanings are in people. And the meanings that we attribute to these words can be very powerful and can be harmful and can hurt people. And so we want to be empowered and empower others and really think about how we're using our words to do good. Continuing on with this idea of how language is used, so using language as a public speaker, how are we using our language? The other way that we're using it is we are thinking about how to be formal. These are like oral term papers, these presentations. You're translating the written to the oral, essentially. And some of the things that we do that might be conversational don't translate well. So we want to have a conversational tone and maintain that conversational tone, but we want to avoid things like slang and generalizing and saying you guys or just sort of informal words. Also defining terms and concepts is important because you want the audience to have access to your information. That's the whole point, is imparting information to your audience so that they can digest it. And so you want to define those terms and introduce some terminology that's germane to your topic. And then defining acronyms and abbreviations. Any acronyms you'll want to spell out APA, or American Psychological Association, so that your audience understands. The other part of this is self-reflexivity, and this is drawing unnecessary attention to yourself as the presenter. So think about reflex, referring back, reflexive. Just reflexivity, reflex, not just referencing or referring, but reflex, reflexivity. And so it's unnecessary to your presentation, anything that's that extraneous. So thinking about verbal, there's a verbal aspect to it and a nonverbal aspect. Things like I think, or I'm nervous, or other disclaimers that you'll want to think about eliminating those because that's not necessary to the presentation. The other part is nonverbal. So things like hair touching. I'm a hair twiddler, okay? I just am. And I know this about myself. We all have speaker idiosyncrasies, and mine happens to be hair twiddling. And so when I am giving a formal presentation, I will often put my hair back because otherwise I will just twiddle. And something that I know about myself, I learned this through practice, and so that's why I encourage you to record yourself to identify what your speaker idiosyncrasy is so that you can address it and work with it. So anything that's taking away, drawing away from the presentation. Avoiding fillers. This is a tough one, those vocalic fillers and verbal fillers. So the vocalic fillers are utterances, things like or And verbal fillers are the actual words. So, you know, like, and whatever. So let's start with those vocalic fillers. Those are also called non-fluencies or disfluencies. And they're not necessary to the presentation, right? If you are in daily language talking with someone, actually serve the purpose. It is a placeholder in turn-taking behavior. So you don't necessarily want to ameliorate it completely from your life because it does serve a social function. However, when you're doing a formal presentation, it no longer serves that purpose, right? Then the verbal fillers, like whatever, those are actual words. And so those are also extraneous to the presentation. So just being aware of those. And what you can do with either of these types of fillers, the vocalic or the verbal, is record yourself, listen to it. You can probably even find an app that counts your ums that can help you identify when you're saying ums. The good news is that the audience is used to hearing a lot of ums. So even if you say a few of them, your audience is used to hearing them in daily language, and so that should be okay. It's when you have a bunch of them and they actually disrupt your message, because you don't want to impede your message to the audience. If you think back to the communication model where you're sending and receiving and simultaneously unpacking messages, you don't want these fillers to get in the way and disrupt those messages and that communicative process. So think about minimizing, saying them under your breath. You can pause, take a breath, and then continue on. So really avoid those ums. But again, if you have a few of them, a couple of them in there, we probably won't notice. But if it becomes peppered throughout your presentation, that's going to be an issue. And that concludes Competency 5.